Good evening, folks. And this is the second part of Ukraine and Great Britain, and also Russia and all that. But Madison is now in office. So we're going to kind of jump around here. April 19th, we're going to do certain dates here. April 19th, 1809, after the British ambassador assures that some restrictions on American merchant ships would be lifted, Madison legalizes trade with Great Britain. When it is later learned that the ambassador's assurances are not official British policy, Madison revives the Non-Intercourse Act. On May 1st, replaced the Non-Insurance Act, Macon's Bill No. 2 authorizes Madison to reopen trade with Britain and France, with the stipulation that if one of them drops its restrictions on American shipping on March 3rd, 1811, the U.S. would again prohibit trade with the other. So in other words, what it's trying to say there, if one does one damage to another, one will keep going while the other one fails to do anything. Now, Napoleon learns Macon's Bill No. 2 and instructs his foreign minister to inform U.S. that restrictions on U.S. vessels will be loosened if the U.S. declares non-intercourse with Britain, and lifted only when Britain lifts its restrictions on shipping. When the French minister implies restrictions had already been lifted, Madison reopens trade with France. In 1810, the United States annexes West Florida. When Madison proclaims Florida West Florida territory and authorizes a military occupation. So obviously, that's where Florida becomes part of the Union, but it's not quite exactly there yet. Now, in November 1810, under the assumption that Napoleon has lifted restrictions on American shipping, Madison prohibits trade with Britain, ending hopes for peace negotiations with the foreign power. But on February 20th, 1811, Congress allows the chapter for the First Bank of the United States to expire. A renewal of the chapter faces severe opposition. Since the bank's inception, Democratic Republicans have questioned the constitutionality, and many are wary of the significant role British investors have in the bank. In addition to this, the federal bank is also opposed by advocates for the growing number of state-chartered banks. February 28, 1811, Madison vetoes the bill that would provide land grants to a Mississippi church. Well, forget that. Then we go down here. On May 16th, 1811, April 6, 1811, Madison appoints James Monroe to his Secretary of State and employs him to negotiate with Britain about ending restrictions on American shipping. May 16th, 1811, after the British warship Great Britain detains the American ship Spitfire off Sandy Hook, New Jersey, near New York Harbor on May 1st, and impressed the American-born sailor into service, the U.S. gunboat president is ordered to protect American ships en route to President. The president mistakes the British sloop of war Little Belt for the Grill, and when the ship fails to identify itself, fires on it, killing 9 and wounding 23. So a little bit of hostility there, but not much. Then, September 19th, 1811, U.S. learns that Napoleon had never issued a decree loosening restrictions on American vessels. And then that's pretty much, well, how that worked out. And then on April 1st, Congress agrees Madison's approval for an embargo against Great Britain. The embargo comes at a time of economic hardship in Britain, and its business called for the repeal of the Order in Council and prohibits foreign commerce in forbidden European ports. April 20th, 1812. That was April 1st, 1812. Now, April 20th, 1812. Well, obviously, Vice President George Clinton dies, sadly. And then, June 1st, 1812, Madison sends a message to Congress giving 4 reasons for declaration of war with Britain. The impressments of American sailors, violation of American neutrality, the blockade of American ports, and Britain's refusal to repeal the Orders in Council. June 4th, the U.S. House of Representatives votes 79 to 49 in favor of war with Britain. June 16th, Britain revokes the Orders in Council, but the news does not reach Congress until after war is declared. The British becomes after France officially repeals its own decrees restricting U.S. trade. The Senate votes 1913 in favor of war. On June 19th, the next day, Madison declares war on Britain. Interesting how that works. But we all know how the war ended. It all pretty much went in favor of the United States. But what's this got to do with Russia and Ukraine? The French and Great Britain finally came to an agreement, and all embargoes were finally lifted after the war was over with. But what does this have to do with Ukraine and Great Britain and Russia? Well, let's start with Russia. Shortly after America became a nation, around 1809, when a war kind of happened here, the United States was also kind of at a war itself. They started making trades with Russia. In 1809, they started making little trade agreements with Russia on other things. So they made trades with Russia and other countries. And so they started making trade agreements with them. And that's how that worked out for them. Trade agreements. You go one way, you go the other. You go back and forth between the two. Now, how does Russia's government fail? Then Ukraine happened. Then World War I happened in 1914. Russia sides with the Allied powers. And so, but then, at one point, an uprising happens in Russia, and the Civil War, Russian Civil War happens, and they literally have turned over to communism, and literally the country split up. And that's where the cold tensions begin to rise. We still have trade with the Soviet Union, but the Russians, we had strong relations with Russia until then. And then they just pretty much all just went south. Now, when I get more time, we'll talk about what each country trades with. What each country will trade, what Russia, China, Japan, and all those countries, what we trade with. And literally, it's a pretty good topic. But what the United States needs to do, if they're going to try to make things better, they need to cut all embargoes. They need to embargo everything that comes from Russia. Not just cut off banks and hurt their economy that way. They need to cut off all supplies going into the United States. Seize all ships, kind of like what they did back in those days that are incoming with ports. It's that simple. I mean, if this is and not allowing anyone to go over to Russia. I mean, that's that simple. And if we're gonna start a war, go through. I don't know. That's on another story. Only if we start a war, we'll talk about that idea then. Well, with that being said, hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications. And with that being said, I'm out of here. Peace.